Hi everyone, I'm Karen MacNeil, and this is WineSpeed.com's People to Know, insider interviews with the most important and fascinating people in the wine business. And today we have the pleasure of having Michael Mondavi. Welcome, Michael.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yep, Michael is the owner of the Michael Mondavi family winery and founder and chairman of Folio Fine Wine Partners. He's the third generation of the famous Mondavi family, who of course helped put Napa Valley on the world stage. Michael was raised at the Charles Krug Winery in St. Helena, California, and in 1966 he co-founded the Robert Mondavi Winery with his father, Robert Mondavi. Today, Michael and his wife Isabel and their children, Rob Jr. and Dina, work together at the Michael Mondavi family winery. So, Michael, the name Mondavi is almost synonymous with Napa Valley at this point. How has being part of that legacy shaped your own path?
Well, the interesting thing, when we started, they didn't know the difference between Mondavi and alfalfa. It didn't mean a thing. My grandfather, father, and uncle at the Charles Krug Winery, it was always Charles Krug wine. And oh yes, the Mondavi families, but the brand was not Mondavi until my father and I started in 1966. And it was kind of interesting because you mentioned my son and daughter. When our son was going to St. Helena Elementary School, it was still not a known name. By the time he got to high school, everyone thought he was born with a golden spoon in his mouth, and they'd pick on him for his name. And I had no concept or understanding of what was going on. I said, Rob, why are you always getting in arguments at school? It only took him 3 schools to go through high school.
Oh my goodness.
But it was because the name was starting to get very popular.
Yeah.
And as a parent, my wife and I didn't recognize that or understand it or understand how to warn the kids and train them to where they might be picked on because of that, and to, get some advice on how to get through it.
Boy, you never think that having a Mondavi name could be in any way a challenge. That's
Well, back then it was.
I guess. Well, because you mentioned your son Rob and his childhood, you grew up in Napa Valley in the 1940s and 50s and 60s. When it was a very different place, I can only imagine. Describe the Napa Valley back then.
Well, this time of the year, the harvest, the third week of August, there would be the harvest parade, and there would be a parade down Main Street. And I think there were 7 wineries back then, including 3 that only made bulk wine and sold them to Gallo or Italian Swiss. And every winery would have a float.
Oh my God.
Good old Steve's Hardware.
Right.
Had a float. Central Valley Builders Supply had a float. And many of them were drawn by horses. And there's a photo of me at Charles Krug Winery when I was about 10 years old on a buckboard with the guy riding the horse, and it's a 4-horse team pulling it through Main Street in St. Helena. That year, the Charles Krug people had bottles that were about 8 feet tall, made with little paper mache, and there was someone in each of the bottles, and there was a Cabernet and a Riesling and a Chenin Blanc and a Pinot, and those 4 bottles were kind of prancing down Main Street. I mean, it was wonderful. And, there were all of maybe 700 people
Right.
that attended, and there were big picnics and kind of just a fun celebration for the upcoming harvest.
Right. People don't realize that Napa Valley back then, square dancing was big. I remember Warren Winiarski asking me if when I still lived in New York and would come out as a journalist, He once said to me, "Do you want to go square dancing with me?" And I thought, square dancing? But, and St. Helena, at the time that you're describing, didn't even have a stoplight.
No, and not even a stop sign on Main Street. And the square dancing was at the Lodi Farm Center on Lodi Lane.
Oh my goodness.
And we and many of the other families that were either growers or in the wine business were all part of the square dancing group, and it was once a month, and it was a potluck dinner. And people would bring things, and we learned how to do-si-do with wine.
It might have improved your do-si-doing, maybe.
Well, later in the evening, the dancing got better.
Yeah, I'm sure it did, yeah. You know, of course, you and your father, Bob, who I knew fairly well as well, had a complicated relationship. How, after all these years, how do you think that impacted you?
It helped my brother, sisters, and my relationship, because even though we are totally different, we knew that we didn't want to have the problems that my father and uncle had, and that the old cliche, blood's thicker than water. We had our disagreements, but we would never let the business disagreement come to the dining table. And we left the business at the business, and that really helped us to be able to work together, where unfortunately with my father and uncle, it didn't work out that way. Right. The interesting thing is, when both of them were in their late 80s and 90s, they started having lunch together once a month. And one time it would be at Peter's house, another time at Robert's, and another time they'd go out to a restaurant. It was hysterical when they went to a restaurant. Both are hard of hearing. So they're shouting at each other. They're having a wonderful time, and everybody's going, "Look at those crazy Mondavi brothers, they're still fighting."
Oh, my
it was
goodness.
one, and I'd love to kind of just sneak up and see them at the lunch having a wonderful time, and everybody's looking around going, "Those brothers are crazy."
You know, that's an interesting point about around the dining table. And of course, your Italian heritage, you can barely even imagine people drinking Italian wine without sitting down at a dinner table with food or a lunch table. And I'm wondering if you feel that as you've watched the evolution and history of wine in America, if you feel that the fact that we don't sit down together as families has somehow impacted the culture of wine in America.
You just made me flashback to when I was in high school, first part of college. It's when Swanson's TV dinners were coming out. So many people had TV trays. My mother and father would never allow TV trays, and we had to sit down at the dinner. And from a very young child, we always had a small taste of wine, and they taught us the moderate consumption of wine. Wine was not considered a luxury, it was considered the liquid food of the table.
Yeah. And it's almost a bit sad that that's not the case today.
Well, it's interesting. The children in Italy and France and Europe are taught moderate consumption of wine. And thinking about it, you know, children have to have a driver's license, they have to go to driving school, then take driving tests, both written and driving. With alcohol, the government feels that at 21 you magically have all those skills.
Yeah.
I really believe there should be a course teaching moderate, healthy consumption of wine with family and friends. And as Louis Pasteur said, wine is the most natural and healthful of all beverages and nature's tranquilizer. Enjoy it in moderation. If we can just follow what Louis Pasteur said, I think the world would be a happier and healthier place.
I agree. Very good. Moving on to something a little bit more modern professionally. In 1999, you and your family purchased a vineyard on Atlas Peak, one of the subregions of Napa Valley, and named it Animo. I think your daughter named it that. You know, given your own history as a child, watching your father and uncle occasionally, or more than occasionally, disagree, what was it like deciding to work with your own immediate family?
We had discussions about that while both my son and daughter were in college. And we had the passion and wanted to work together. We'd also been given an example of how not to do it successfully long term. We said, you know, we're going to make mistakes, but we'll make different mistakes. We don't want to make the same mistake that Robert and Peter did.
Right.
And by having dialogue, and don't just assume that everything's okay after you had an argument. And go to my brother sometimes and I'd say, hey, Tim, let's go for a walk in the vineyard. And we'd go for a walk and we'd look at the vines and we'd say, you know, we're really lucky to be in this type of a business and family industry. And it would just be like, you know, a gentle caress on the hand to set down the emotions and allow you to think with your brain instead of with your emotion.
Hard to do.
Oh, I was going to use a word, but I shouldn't, but it's very difficult.
You know, when you started Folio Fine Wine Partners, I thought, this makes so much sense because your background had been so strongly in sales and in marketing, and you've lived that world for decades. You know that world really well. But then in 2020, you decided to sell a controlling interest to the French luxury company EPI. Why sell it?
We are still 40+% partners. The concept was that the best wines in the world are going to be made by small family companies. We had about 15 wonderful families working with us up in 2020. I knew that the industry was consolidating even more. Even though we were growing faster than the rate of growth of the wine industry, we were shrinking in scale compared to the conglomerates and all the mergers that were taking place. And for us to be meaningful for a wholesaler, we had to have enough scale in dollars, the only thing they understand, to get the attention of the sales manager, of the salesperson on the street, and they liked, oh yes, we have M by Michael Mondavi. They'll only sell it if a restaurant asks for it, if you don't have enough volume. And we knew that the wines we made would never be that volume, but we knew the best wine in the world would be made by small family companies. And using the old guild model of bring the craftsmen together to one location to sell their wares, if I can, and now we have 26 winery families that we represent from Europe and South America, or the Southern Hemisphere. And when we go to a wholesaler now, in the fine wine division, whether it's a company like Breakthrough or RNDC, we can be within the top 5 in dollar volume. That's the only way we can get attention. Staying private with just my son, daughter, myself, we didn't have the scale or the financial ability to attract other family companies. They thought, well, they're doing it, but will they survive? Christopher Descours, who's in his early 50s, is the owner of EPI. He makes decisions on, will this decision be good for my son and daughter? He thinks 10 and 20 years from now. Many companies, when we ran a public company, they only think next quarter. They don't allow you to think long term. And I thought, this man strategically wants partners. He didn't want to buy it all, but he wanted a majority. We agreed on the strategies. We agreed on how we didn't want growth for the sake of growth is evil, but growth to accomplish your strategic objective is healthy and necessary. And we're just very happy to be with the partner. It's interesting. We did the letter of intent December of 1919.
1919.
I'm 2019. Sorry.
You've been planning this for a long time, I can see.
Yeah. But 2019.
2019, yeah.
And
Right
a month
before
later,
COVID.
COVID hit.
Oh my gosh.
Before we were able to go from letter of intent to a contract. It was COVID, everything shut down.
Yeah.
Long story short, 4 months later, we signed the contract and not one thing from the letter of intent was changed. Now, Christopher could have been very tough and said, oh, the industry's bad, it's difficult, we have to lower the price.
Right.
He said, I'm in this for the long term, we think that this works long term, we want to be long-term partners and grow together. That's the type of partner I have the luxury of being with. Actually, my son and daughter have a better luxury for it.
Yeah. That's quite phenomenal. Your background, to pick up on this idea, your background has been in sales and marketing, and people, I think, know you for that. What fewer people know is that you also make wine. Mm-hmm. That, in fact, in the early days of the Robert Mondavi family.
Yeah, I was responsible for the winemaking from 66 to 76 when my brother joined us. And in 75, we made the wine together. And I realized that I was not a good teacher because I kept correcting him.
Ooh, I bet he didn't like that.
And that was a very difficult time for both of us. And I said, Tim, I think you have enough experience now. You focus on the wine. I will focus on marketing, sales, and general management. And we became two cylinders of a very good V2 Harley Davidson.
Was your natural inclination that you were better inherently at sales? Because it's a separate skill.
Yeah, I think necessity becomes the mother of invention. When my father and I started, I loved the vineyards, loved the winemaking. Tim's 8+ years younger than I. So when he was going to Davis, he knew he wanted to get into winemaking. And my father said to us, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I like it all, Dad. I like the viticulture, the enology, the marketing, the selling. I don't like finance. We'll get an accountant to do that for us. But Tim seems really interested in production, so let's let him choose. And he said he really wanted to be in winemaking. And I think our natural skills just fell into place. And he ends up, I think he's a much better winemaker than I. I think I did okay. We were able to win many, many tastings, and people like Robert Lawrence Balzer and others would drive us all crazy.
Yes, he did.
He did a wonderful job of promoting wine. If the wines didn't taste good, you wouldn't sell the second bottle.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Well, there must be a winemaking gene running through the Mondavi family, because your son is also a very good winemaker.
I think he's better than me too. But here's something that we learned from my grandmother. I presented her with the 1969 Cab Reserve out of barrels. 69 was the first year my father let me make the wine all by myself. Yeah, I had Warren Winarski in 66, 67, then 68, 69, Milenko Grigic.
Oh, yes, Mike Gergich.
Mike Gergich assisting me on that. But I went to my grandmother and I said, taste the 69 out of barrel. And she smells it and she goes, and she was the typical Italian grandmother, 5 feet tall, 5 feet wide. She looks up at me and goes, make wine that tastes good. And I go, you don't like it? And she goes, oh, I like it, but always make wine that tastes good. And I said, no, what do you mean? She goes, it's simple. When you serve your wine to family and friends at lunch or dinner, if they want a second or third or even fourth glass, that wine tastes good. And then she came right up to me and said, if they only drink one, you go back to work.
This sounds like the famous Rosa. That's right.
This is Rosa,
Rosa
yes.
Mondavi, yes.
But interesting, I kind of forgot about that afterwards. The second or third year Tim was working with us, we were tasting wine and I shared that story with him. And he said, well, we only taste wine versus wine versus wine. Let's also take the final 3 candidates of that final blending session to lunch and see which one gets empty. Almost always, the number one wine is not the empty glass. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
You can make a wine to win wine tastings, or you can make a wine to enhance the enjoyment of the meal. And Tim and I went in that direction. We'll give up a point or 2 or 3 or whatever to the wine judge when they do wine, but when they try our wine with food, they're going to want another glass or another bottle.
I remember that moment in the 1980s when the term food wine entered the vernacular, and some of it was the result of the emphasis at the Robert Mondavi Winery on making wines that were drinkable at the table and that were, as you say, wines that people emptied first.
Yeah, they had to be food friendly.
Food friendly, right. What character trait do you think you possess that has led to your success?
I like people. I think that helps.
Yeah.
I want to constantly learn. And the best wine shop, for example, in Los Gatos, what now Silicon Valley, was called the Los Gatos Wine and Cheese Shop. And starting in 1967, when our Riesling, Chenin Blanc, Fumé Blanc, we had like 9 varieties back then.
Yeah.
But I would take the first Wednesday of each month other than harvest and drive throughout Northern California and call on wine shops and restaurants. And my father and I said the top 5 restaurants and the top 5 wine shops in each major market is the only place we want to go. And I went to this shop, and the owner, I was showing him the Chardonnay, which was the third wine. He goes, kid, come over here. He says, I have 4 Chardonnays. Charles Krug, Martin Ray, Almaden, Paul Masson. I don't need 5 Chardonnays.
Oh my goodness.
I go, okay. I come back the next month with another wine. Long story short, wine number 8 or 9 is the Cabernet.
Oh.
Because it was had to age longer. So
Right.
it was the last wine. I get to his store, and I always got to his store before it opened. And he sees me, he goes, kid, you again. I said, yeah, it's me again. He said, I'll make you a deal. I said, what's the deal? He said, you get back in your car and go back to Napa. I said, but you haven't tasted my Cabernet. And I was brought French bread with me. And he said, but I said, I want you to taste the Cabernet. He said, if you get back in your car and go to Napa, get the truck and bring me 5 cases of wine of each of them you've shown me, and 5 cases of the Cabernet. I stood there. I said, what? He said, you heard me. Now, get out of here. I said, I have to ask you a question first. I said, why are you doing that? He said, you're persistent, but you respected my intelligence and my palate. You didn't come back and say, taste the Chardonnay again, taste the Chardonnay again, taste the Chardonnay again.
Right.
You not once repeated the same thing that I'd said no to.
Right.
He said, that proved to me that you probably made pretty good wine. because
Wow.
you're so persistent. But you were smart enough to not just be redundant. That was probably the best lesson I ever got, whether it was university or anything, about sales. You have to respect the position and the intelligence of the person you're selling to.
Yeah.
And before that, I thought I knew everything, and but he taught me the wonderful, valuable lesson.
That is an incredible story. What would be something about you that people would be surprised to learn?
I cry at the movies.
Me too. In fact, sometimes great wine makes me cry. Wine is an emotional. It's an emotional entity. By the way, what are we tasting here?
This is the M by Michael Mondavi, but it should be by Rob now because he makes it. My son makes it. And it's a Cabernet. It is primarily Atlas Peak. And the vineyards on Atlas Peak and Howell Mountain combination. At first, the idea was with the initial vintage, I want single vineyard estate, just like Bordeaux.
Right.
And Rob, when we started making the wine together, said, Dad, we have this other vineyard with some Petit Verdot that will really enhance this. So I said, okay. Flash forward to the last few years, he said, Dad, by having less than 75% Cabernet Sauvignon, we can make a much more pleasing Cabernet style or Bordeaux style wine than by having it 75% and above.
Right.
So we had the debate. Do we need Cabernet Sauvignon on the label, or can it just be Napa red wine?
Right.
And I said, we have to make the best wine. We'll figure out how to communicate it.
Right.
And so the neat thing is now I'm learning from my son.
That's fantastic. So it's just M by Michael Mondavi family.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, it's a beautiful picture also of a vine there. So when you taste a wine, either your own wine or anyone else's, what's the first thing you look for if you're trying to decide if it's great or not?
First thing I look for is in the nose. Number one, is it fresh? And does it invite me to go back in and smell it some more? A younger wine can either have a lot of fruit or conversely be deep in the glass, depending on the style. And I don't like it too fruity, and I don't like it too simple.
Yeah.
And so if simple wine can be boring.
Simple wine is boring.
It's like, Coca-Cola, yeah, one every year or two, that's enough.
Yeah. I don't know. Do I really want to say simple wine is boring? Not always. I think a simple, inexpensive wine can be delightful, but a monochromatic wine can be boring, right? If the wine just keeps saying, hi, I'm cherries, I'm about Karen, I'm about cherries. That's
And to me, a wine not only has to be pleasing to the sight, the nose, the touch, the taste, and then aftertaste. Does it leave my mouth feeling happy? And if it leaves the mouth pleasant and happy, then it's a good wine. One thing I learned from my father when we were traveling through Bordeaux, we'd been at Chateau Latour and had a wonderful tasting of their young wines in the barrel. We got in the car and we were on about a 3-hour drive south, and my father all of a sudden goes, "Can you taste that?" And I go, "What?" He says, "Taste, you can still taste that wine from Chateau Latour."
Wow.
And I went, "Oh my God." And it was pleasant. And He said, that is a wine that will live for a long time, but also be wonderful when you have it with a meal. And there's intense flavor that falls off the table. And then there's wine with character that just lingers and makes your mouth happy for a long time.
Well, this wine is making me happy, and I'm happy for both you, Rob, Dina, and Isabel, that after really just decades of working so hard in the industry, that the four of you have created this family winery together.
Well, you know what's fun? This morning I was with Rob going through tasting some of the Cabernets that are just coming in. Some just juice, some just beginning fermentation. And it's so much fun because tasting with him and then saying, have fun, you make it.
Yes. A lot of sleepless nights probably coming up ahead. Michael, thank you so much for...
It's a pleasure to be with you,
Yeah.
and thank you for helping to educate our audience and helping to audience and wine lovers to not only learn more, but be happier because of the way you communicate to them.
You heard it from him. All right. And our complete interview with Michael Mondavi is at winespeed.com.